冰箱，最后在一个浅黄色的薄膜袋里面发现有血淋淋的东西。之后我就问这个女的这是什么，她告诉我这是刚杀的鸡。我说不对，这个就是一个典型的一个人。
Welcome to Red Eastern True Crime. If you want to see more crime stories, please like and subscribe. Let's dive into this story. For 2 days straight, Mr. L's sister felt a knot tightening in her stomach. Her brother and their mother always called back. Always. But this time, nothing. 2 days. No replies. Just a cold, endless ringtone. What really unsettled her was this. The home landline had been answered. Twice. Not by an adult, but by her 3-year-old niece. In a soft, milky voice, the little girl said, "Daddy and Grandma are in the room." That one innocent line felt wrong. Deeply wrong. She didn't dare wait any longer. She called a friend in Shenzhen's Bao'an district, Mr. Chu, and begged him to go to her brother's apartment. Just check. Please. Make sure they're okay. May 20th, 2013, 3 p.m. Bihai Mingyuan, Building 28, Apartment 701, Shenzhen. Mr. Chu stood at the door and knocked. And knocked. No one opened. A neighbor cracked their own door and leaned out, saying something that chilled him. "I just heard hammering. Like someone nailing things inside. There should be someone at home." The neighbor helped call out a few times down the hallway. After a long pause, a woman's voice finally came from inside. The door opened a crack. Standing there was Pan Yanfeng, Mr. L's wife. At first, she only opened the inner wooden door. The outer metal security gate was still locked. She turned the key several times before the lock finally released with a clack. Inside was a standard 3-bedroom, 2-living-room apartment. All 3 bedroom doors were open. The little girl was sleeping in one of the rooms. The bathroom door was closed. The floor was spotless, so clean it almost shone. At a glance, everything looked perfectly normal. Pan said calmly, "My husband went to work." Mr. Q didn't answer. He just took out his phone and dialed Mr. L's number. The ringtone sounded almost immediately. Not from outside. Not from the hallway. It was coming from inside the apartment. From somewhere near the TV feature wall. Mr. L's phone had never left the house. Pan hurried to fill in more detail. "Last night he slept on the sofa in the living room. I took our daughter back to the bedroom. When I woke up this morning, he and my mother-in-law were both gone. Later, she also called Mr. L's sister. Her tone was light, almost casual. Far too casual for 2 missing people. Don't worry, okay? Your mom went out to have some fun. Her health is great. Nothing's wrong." When Mr. Q asked why she hadn't answered the phone the previous day, Pan's reply was simple. "I didn't hear it." But her calm, almost detached attitude made everyone around her feel that something was very, very wrong. May 21st. Still no word from Mr. L and his mother. Mr. Q went back to the apartment. Again, no sign of either of them. At Mr. L's sister's request, he took Pan to the local police station to file a missing persons report, formally stating that her husband and her mother-in-law had disappeared. At the station, Mr. Q anxiously explained everything to the police, worried and nervous. Pan, on the other hand, she stayed relaxed. She even chatted and joked with the officers. One officer finally couldn't hold back. "Your husband and mother-in-law are missing. How can you still laugh?" Soon, 2 officers were sent back with Pan to apartment 701 to have a look. That first visit turned up no obvious physical clues, but Mr. Q still couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened. He refused to give up. He went from hospital to hospital nearby, searching for any record of Mr. L or Miss Wu. He found nothing. The next day, another relative, Mr. Liu, heard about the disappearance. He happened to be on a business trip in Shenzhen. He rushed to the complex and asked to see the CCTV footage. The surveillance video gave them a precise timeline. May 18th, 5:41 p.m. Mr. L's mother, Ms. Wu, is seen taking the elevator up alone. A few minutes later, Mr. L appears on camera, holding his young daughter's hand, returning home. After that moment, the camera never saw any of them leave the building again. Inside the apartment, Mr. Liu met Pan and insisted on checking Mr. L's phone. What he found was disturbing. From the time of the report back to the day of the incident, every call log and text message had been deleted. Only one record remained. Over 10 days before he disappeared, Mr. L had purchased a personal accident insurance policy. Mr. Liu and Mr. Q rushed back to the police and filed another report. This time, the officers really started paying attention. In the elevator, on the way up, Mr. Liu suddenly froze. A memory surfaced, a recent news story from Guangdong, a woman who had killed her husband and mother-in-law, and dismembered their bodies. He turned to the officers and said quietly, "That case looks a lot like what we're seeing here." The officers went straight to apartment 701. At first, Pan refused to open the door. "My husband and mother-in-law aren't here," she said. "Go look somewhere else." Her refusal only deepened their suspicion. The police insisted. After a tense standoff, Pan finally unlocked the door and let them in. The moment they stepped across the threshold, something in her changed. Her expression stiffened. Her eyes flickered, nervous, guarded. When the officers started walking toward the kitchen, Pan instinctively moved to stand in front of the fridge, as if trying to shield it from view. That single movement was enough. The officers knew exactly where to look. They pulled the fridge door open and froze. The scene you heard at the beginning of this story replayed before their eyes. A pale yellow plastic bag. Blood. Inside, 2 skinned human heads. Faced with evidence she could no longer deny, Pan broke and confessed. She had killed her husband. And she had killed her mother-in-law. At the time of the crime, Pan was 36 years old, a former office clerk. Her husband, Mr. L, was 41, an engineer. 2 years into their marriage, they had a daughter. Pan quit her office job to care for their child and helped some relatives with online foreign trade orders from home. By 2013, they had been married for 5 years, and their daughter was 3. During Chinese New Year that January, Mr. L's mother, Ms. Wu, 69, took a train from their hometown in Hunan to Shenzhen to help look after her granddaughter. At first, everything seemed peaceful. Ms. Wu shared the childcare burden and eased Pan's workload. But as time went on, small frictions began to surface. According to Pan, whenever she had conflicts with her mother-in-law, her husband always said the same thing: "Just be patient. Let my mother have her way." The more she heard that, the more resentment took root. Pan also claimed that Ms. Wu often complained about her to Mr. L behind her back. When Mr. L came home from work, he wouldn't ask what had really happened. He would simply scold Pan, "You shouldn't fight with my mother." Pan said this pattern repeated itself again and again, each time leaving her more humiliated, more angry, more silently furious. May 19, 2013, around 7 a.m., Pan had just gotten up and was in the bathroom washing up. Ms. Wu was in the living room watching TV. Pan's 3-year-old daughter was playing nearby and accidentally fell. Ms. Wu blamed Pan immediately for not watching the child. Burning with anger, she stormed into the bathroom and started shouting abuse at her. Pan shouted back. Seeing her daughter-in-law dare to talk back, Ms. Wu snapped. She grabbed a broom and began hitting Pan. In the bedroom, Mr. L woke up to the noise and came to the bathroom door. Without asking what happened, he sided with his mother and joined in scolding Pan. After a while, Ms. Wu dropped the broom and went back to the living room, calmly watching TV as if nothing had happened. Mr. L went back to bed. Pan was left alone, shaking with anger and humiliation. Back in the bedroom, she stood over her sleeping husband. Humiliation, rage, a sense of never being heard. It all boiled over. She walked into the kitchen, picked up a pressure cooker, and went back to the bedroom, while Ms. Wu sat in the living room, Unaware, Pan raised the pressure cooker and brought it crashing down on her husband's head as he slept. The noise brought Ms. Wu running into the bedroom. Before she could fully grasp what she was seeing, Pan turned, lifted the pressure cooker again, and slammed it down onto her mother-in-law. At 36 years old, Pan had just killed her 41-year-old husband and her 69-year-old mother-in-law, all while her 3-year-old daughter was inside the same home. After the killings, Pan dragged both bodies into the bathroom. There, she dismembered the corpses, boiled parts of the remains, and packed body parts into multiple black garbage bags. On May 19th and 20th, surveillance cameras in the complex captured Pan making 8 trips with her daughter, throwing black plastic bags into trash bins inside and outside the compound. As for the heads, she didn't dare throw them away. They were too recognizable, too risky. If somebody opened a bag and saw them, everything would be over. So she wrapped the 2 heads in a pale yellow plastic bag and hid them in the fridge, waiting for what she thought would be a better time to dispose of them. What she did not expect was how quickly Mr. L's family would sense something was wrong, and how relentlessly they would push to find out the truth. At the crime scene, police recovered the pressure cooker used as the murder weapon, a kitchen knife, a hammer, bloodstains from both victims, and Pan's fingerprints on all of the tools. The evidence was overwhelming. Pan was arrested on the spot. That night, dozens of officers surrounded and sealed off the entire building. Once the case hit the media, it exploded. But public opinion took a direction the family never expected. Pan was a domestic violence victim. The husband and mother-in-law had it coming. She fought back for all abused women. To the victims' relatives, this wave of sympathy for the killer was a second, brutal blow. Mr. Liu was devastated. The investigation was still ongoing, yet countless netizens refused to sympathize with the 2 murdered victims, refused to condemn the brutality of the killings, and some even said they wanted to copy what Pan had done. Mr. Liu said he couldn't stay silent. A few days after the murders, on May 26, 2013, he posted on a Shenzhen real estate forum, "I am a relative of the dismemberment case in Xixiang Bihai Mingyuan, and I have something to say." In that post, he responded to rumor after rumor and openly questioned Pan's claim of being a victim of domestic violence. He even published his phone number and wrote that he knew the entire case. As a former soldier, he said he was willing to stake his personal honor that every fact he stated was true. The next day, Mr. Liu accepted multiple media interviews. He told them Ms. Wu had lived an incredibly hard life. Her husband, a demobilized soldier, became paralyzed and bedridden for more than 10 years. She took care of him alone, day and night, until he died. After that, she cared for her own mother, who lived into her 90s. Only after both elders had passed away did she agree to go to Shenzhen to help her son's family with childcare. Ms. Wu was 1 month away from turning 70. She had never been to Beijing. She often said she wanted to take a plane just once, to feel what it was like to fly. Her daughter had already planned to buy her that ticket, but Ms. Wu chose to go to Shenzhen first, putting her family's needs before her own wish. She never got the chance to board that plane. Mr. Liu said that at 41, Mr. L was in the prime of his career. He spent long hours in the lab, was recognized as a key technical expert at his company, and was described as modest and kind. According to Mr. Liu, several of Mr. L's colleagues broke down in tears when they heard the news. He even showed reporters an MMS on his phone. A statement issued by Mr. L's company on May 26th, praising him as a humble, hard-working person who always helped others during his 5 years there. Mr. L was also by all accounts a family man. He worked in Longgang District, far from home, so he stayed in the company dormitory on weekdays and only returned home on weekends. Each time he came back, he brought meat, vegetables, fruit, and milk for his daughter. Most of his salary went directly to Pan, since she had no formal job. He even linked Pan's pension and medical insurance to his own company account. paying those fees for her every month. As for Pan herself, Mr. Liu said he had only met her 2 or 3 times. He didn't know her well, but he remembered one detail clearly. During the frantic search for Mr. L, he saw Pan on the phone with Mr. L's sister, saying, "Your brother is so handsome." To Mr. Liu, Pan did not look like someone with any mental disability. He also stressed that Ms. Wu had only lived with them for 4 months. In his opinion, not long enough for conflicts to become so deep that they could never be resolved. Mr. Liu recalled one incident that hinted at possible marital trouble. During Qingming Festival that April, Mr. L returned to Hunan to erect a tombstone for his late father. According to local custom, the whole family should have gone, but Pan stayed behind. Mr. Liu asked Mr. L why his wife hadn't come. Mr. L told him quietly, Pan wanted a divorce. She had even written out a divorce agreement, willing to leave with nothing, willing to give full custody of their daughter to Mr. L, offering to pay 500 RMB, around 70 USD, per month in child support. Mr. L refused to sign. Later, Ms. Wu tried to persuade Pan not to leave. After that, Pan stopped mentioning divorce, at least on the surface. Mr. Liu raised another question. Pan was under 1.6 meters tall and physically slight. Could she really have killed her taller, stronger husband, killed her mother-in-law, dismembered 2 bodies, and disposed of the remains, completely alone? She claimed to be a victim of domestic violence, yet investigators found no injuries on her body. Mr. Liu said he believed it was possible that Pan did not act alone. He urged the police to look into whether she had an accomplice. He also pointed out that during the early stages of the investigation, there was reportedly another man present at the apartment, someone suspected of having an unusual relationship with Pan, but the police never released further details about that man. As the person who introduced Pan and Mr. L, Mr. Q had known Mr. L for 20 years. He said both Mr. L and Pan were naturally introverted. Mr. L was honest, mild-tempered, and soft-spoken. In 20 years, Mr. Q said, he had never seen Mr. L get into a fight, or even raise his voice. Just over a week before the crime, on May 6th, Mr. L and his family had gone to Mr. Q's home for a gathering. Mr. Q noticed nothing unusual between the couple. In fact, Pan had said to him and his wife, "My mother-in-law is wonderful. Her cooking is so good I've gained 2 kilos. Since she came, my life has gotten so much easier. We watch TV together and chat all the time." Those warm words now stand in stark contrast to the horror that followed. After the murders, Mr. L and Pan's 3-year-old daughter was taken in by Mr. L's sister. When the little girl first arrived, her eyes were empty, blank. For 2 days, she never once called Mom. She only called for her dad, her aunt, and her grandma. She was hypersensitive to sound. Even in broad daylight, she would sometimes shiver and suddenly shout, "Help!" She said her father had cried for help. She also said her father had fought with an uncle, that her father lost, and that her mother was helping the uncle. But she was too young. None of her words could be used as formal legal evidence. Mr. Liu also emphasized again the personal accident insurance Mr. L bought in the weeks before the crime was purchased at Pan's request. To comfort the traumatized child, Mr. L's sister took her to places like the aquarium in the following days. She and her husband eventually decided to adopt their niece and take her back to their hometown in Hunan. They already had a teenage son, but they promised to give the girl the best environment they could for her to grow up in. In December 2013, the Shenzhen Intermediate People's Court delivered its verdict. For intentional homicide and for committing the crime with extreme cruelty, the court sentenced Pan Yanfeng to death. Many details of the case were never made public. The judgment did not reveal more about possible accomplices or deeper motives. After the case, many neighbors in the building were so frightened that they moved out. The residential complex gained a grim reputation, listed by some as one of Shenzhen's top 10 haunted murder flats. What shocked many observers was that, even then, a sizable number of people still refused to condemn the brutality of the killings. Instead, they turned Pan into a symbol, a fantasy of revenge against a violent husband and a wicked mother-in-law. They projected their own anger, frustration, and unresolved family conflicts onto this case, blurring the line between sympathizing with suffering and justifying murder. In the end, this case comes down to a simple, brutal order: kill, cut, conceal, then face the law. Was she wronged? Possibly. But grievance explains a feeling, not a corpse, not a pot on the stove, not a fridge that holds what should never be there. Emotion deserves understanding, but blood never deserves justification. You may choose whom you pity. Just don't forget, the ones with no choice at all were the two who died, and the little girl who watched her world collapse before she even learned how to speak in full sentences. What do you think of this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. If you found this story meaningful, please like and subscribe.